Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest in a series of an extensive series of webinars that we've been running. My name is James Pitcher. I manage the FS Club at ZN. I'd like to first of all thank our sponsors, without whom this and many of the other webinars would not be possible. There's a little view of some of those on the screen there, so thank you for those. You're going to hear very little from me at the outset today, other than just to go through the logistics for the next half an hour or so, and to introduce our excellent speaker today, and then to chair any questions. And I suspect, given today's fascinating topic and insights, that there's going to be quite a few. So I'm looking forward to it. So by way of the agenda, it's very brief. I think 11 o'clock to 11:05 has been quite generous. I won't spend too long. But if you would like to submit questions while Michael is talking, which you might well want to do, please do so by accessing the box on the top right-hand corner of your screen. I will see those come through and facilitate the answering of those questions at the end. And we are going to leave plenty of time for those questions. Just a note also that we are recording the full webinar, as we have been doing with the dozens that we've done already, and this will be posted on our ZN and FS Club websites within the next 24 hours probably. So I'm delighted to say that we've got Michael Hoddy today, who's director and co-founder of the Technium Global, or TTG. I know that Michael is a passionate advocate in helping clients and find effective solutions. And he advises on all aspects of information technology, security, and tech innovation. His talk today focuses on hostile profiling, a subject that you may have heard of, but perhaps like me, we're not really aware of how organisations and companies actually use this to help minimise risk, improve security, and so on and so forth. So again, I said very little from me. Michael, I know, is going to supply his details on the slide, his final slide, and obviously that will then be on our website. And he's very comfortable and happy that if anyone wants to call or contact him directly in any way afterwards, to do so. So without further ado, you'll hear a little bit more from me at the end with the questions, but I'm going to hand over to Michael. Thank you, Michael.
James, thank you so much. And excuse me, good morning, everyone. And as James said, welcome to today's webinar. I'm delighted to be afforded this opportunity to meet with you all today and present to you why people do hostile profiling. It's an interesting topic, as James said, and it's getting increasing focus in the marketplace. It's in the cybersecurity industry is rife with a number of different type of focuses at the moment. But in the time that we have available to us today, I promise to share with you our experiences and help give you some clarity, I hope, on what hostile profiling is, and also where to get help should you want or need it. As James said, I'm Michael Hoddy, and some of you may be asking, what is hostile profiling? Hostile profiling, rather. Sorry, it's really a niche but growing and important part of the market for companies and organisations that are looking to understand more about their risk posture and take appropriate steps and measures to manage that risk. So, how did I get into hostile profiling? Well, I think it's fair to say that it wasn't a conscious career decision. And I suppose really the trigger as to why I got into hostile profiling was as a result of a previous working experience when I worked for a large company some years ago. And it was really through quite unbelievable series of random events that came to pass that, frankly speaking, would in fact do justice to a very fine work of fiction. When I and my colleagues found out that a trusted and respected colleague that we'd worked with for over 2 years was in actual fact not who they said they were, was actually still working for their previous employer and was actually engaged by their previous employer to work for my then employer inside my then employer's and still secrets about my then employer's commercial activities. This individual, as I say, had been, the company that we both worked for at the time, employed very robust, recruitment and HR processes and policies, and still maintained a very robust security posture. So the question came to mind is, well, hang on, this is a massive shock, and clearly, a great sense of surprise, and not least a huge breach of trust, in the sense that, this was something I'd worked with extensively and trusted implicitly, in terms of their area of expertise. It really posed questions in my mind as to how on earth this had been possible. And that probably was one of the key trigger points that set me on my path. So without much further ado, James, perhaps we can move to the next slide. So, not sure how many of you are pretty good on your Russian, but Dovrain or Provrain, trust but verify. Famously, or infamously, some may say, made a popular saying by Ronald Reagan. But what's quite interesting about that, it was never Ronald Reagan's saying. It's a very centuries-old Russian proverb, and a proverb, by the way, that I think has a lot of resonance with today's society, because when you bear in mind that the KGB at one point may well have indeed used this saying as well as part of their kind of mantra. I think it's the fact that humans' natural inclination is to ignore warnings until problems become too big to ignore. And I think that's one of the big challenges that we have when trust is issued and given to people and companies that you work with and do business with. I think that one thing I'll just say about this, just picture yourself at the moment in a virtual meeting, colleagues and clients that you trust. Typically, that trust is earned over a period of time by behaviours, actions, and results. And I think that what this saying states quite clearly is that we're not advocating a removal of trust, but we're saying that where you want to afford trust to people and groups of people and companies, you should verify whether that trust is well placed. Next slide, please. So what are we going to talk about today? What is hostile profiling? Why do hostile profiling? Why now, more than any other time? And how legal is hostile profiling? And probably more importantly, over all of this, what benefit will we get from conducting hostile profiling? Next slide, please. So what is hostile profiling? Well, essentially, hostile profiling is what criminals and state actors do in order to build a picture of what you, your family, and organisation looks like. It's effectively what we call the pattern of life. And it's looking at the weak spots, lifestyle, hobbies, habits, dislikes, pressure points, and areas where they can compromise you. And if we go to the next slide, please, Morgan. And again, I'll hasten to add that any physical similarity between the character on this screen and your presenter are just an unfortunate coincidence. But what I would say is that why do criminal actors and criminal organisations and state actors conduct hostile profiling? Well, it's very, very simple. They want to find out how they can compromise you and monetize you by finding out things of value. And things of value are quite often physical things, but also virtual things as well. And they may not be necessarily things of value that matter to you, but they could well indeed matter to the parties that are looking to use the information that they get from you for nefarious purposes. Next slide, please. So this is almost like a Christmas gift that keeps giving. I actually took these shots the other day when I was actually in my local high street, and I walked past this gentleman. So just as an example about how things can be sometimes very, very targeted with intent, and sometimes they, criminals can act with a sense of opportunity. This gentleman was working for a large, well-known company. Thankfully, his details are the company's details are blotted out on the screen, so you can't see who he was working for. He was sat in a coffee shop in my high street. Nothing wrong with that, except that he had his back to the window. I walked past him over a 25-minute period going about my business, and I shoulder surfed and took screenshots over his shoulder every single time I went past. And he wasn't even aware that I was doing it, and it's perfectly legal to do this as well, I hasten to add. So I think, if I was of a criminal intent, I could have quite easily found something that would have determined, the fact that we've got something of value potentially being taken here, when this gentleman's going about his lawful business. I'm completely unaware, as I say before, that something was going on in the background. Next slide, please. So why should you do hostile profiling? Well, I think it's fair to say that most of us would agree that we would like to understand where our weak spots are and how your organisation, or indeed yourself, could well be compromised. And I think it's important as well that when we see more and more cases of cyber criminals increasingly becoming more and more creative and more active in impacting people and organisations with online fraud, for example, it's important to find out how criminals can monetize you. Surely it's important to understand, if you know, to kind of paraphrase the great Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu, if you know thy enemy, know thyself. I mean, surely it's important to understand, we would argue, if you know what the enemy is likely to do to attack you, then you can take appropriate steps and measures proactively to minimise the damage that may be done to you. Next slide, please. And why now? I think that, I'm not going to go into the kind of the very obvious thing that obviously we're going through significant periods of profound change at the moment with the advent of the pandemic. That's now known as COVID-19, of course. But I think that what's quite clear to all of us is that, not only has the way in which we've worked historically changed, but, events are changing around at a rapid rate of knots, and criminal actors, quite frankly, are changing and modifying and improving their methods of approach and attack. I think that with this fundamental change that's taking place around us as we see it right now, I think that there needs to be perhaps a new approach to the way in which people take a proactive stance in ensuring that the criminals don't attack you and get access to things of value. I think that's probably really important. And again, as we said, new hybrid ways of working or working from home means increasingly as well, I should add, that we're seeing more and more of our people assets are increasingly being isolated, working in their home environment. And that's somewhere that we're seeing criminal actors are increasingly targeting people to, as I say, get access to information and things of value. Next slide, please. What benefits would you get from hostile profiling? Well, I think, to be frank, knowing what the criminals see and then understanding, where you can maybe take steps to rectify weaknesses or minimise damage is clearly something that is to be firmly recommended. And I think it's important to stress as well that this is a service that we provide. It's not a product. Every engagement that we do with clients is bespoke to that particular client, whether that be an individual or indeed a company. Excuse me. And I think that the service is only limited, as we say, by time and by imagination. I think that what's probably quite critical is that one of the biggest challenges is that when we shine a light on what we find through open source intelligence gathering, or OSINT, which incidentally, coming back to the one of the points further down below, OSINT is accessing and analysing data from perfectly open source and legal areas on the internet. Acting on the profile that we present will increase your resilience. Not acting upon it, frankly speaking, will probably leave you open to having things of value taken away from you in a very unpleasant manner. I think that what's also important about hostile profiling, it's completely passive, it's undetectable. I've referenced the fact that earlier on that it's legal. No one's going to be breaking any laws under GDPR or any other legal rulings like the Computer Misuse Act of 1998. As I say, because we're accessing open source intelligence, gathering data from publicly available information locations, and then doing due diligence and good governance around that information and presenting that to our clients to help them understand what actions that they need to take to minimise their risk posture. And I think again, in all of this, when you go into business, if you buy a house, it's very rare that you buy a house without seeing the house beforehand and having a survey done. It's very rare that you would take out a mortgage without checking the terms and conditions of that mortgage and agreeing the rate of interest that you're going to and the amount of money you're going to pay back on that mortgage. So, frankly speaking, doing due diligence and good governance by conducting a hostile profile on potentially on a new company that you're going to be doing business with, or indeed on your own organisation to find out how maybe your organisation may look to the external market, and in particular to organised criminals, we believe is very, very good practice. You can deploy it throughout your supply chain, as we said before, as much as you can deploy it within and within your supply chain as well. And I think again, it goes without saying that when you know the risks that you're facing, then you can take minimising steps or steps to minimise the damage that may be caused by those risks that you've identified. Next slide, please, Morgan. I always like this slide. Trust is good, but control is better. It may sound a bit sinister. That was actually a very famous saying by Lenin. But in actual fact, the correct translation, if you know your Russian, and I must admit I'm not a Russian linguist, is trust but check. And again, apologies to the famous John Lennon. But imagine all the people in terms of the fact that that who may potentially look at this picture and their first pass may be that it's Daniel Radcliffe, and it's not. So I think again, always check, always trust on first pass, perhaps, but always check the details thereafter to make sure that who you're dealing with is what you're dealing with. In terms of what's in it for you, I think the benefits of hostile profiling are quite clear. I think that maximising return is an obvious one. I think exposing bias within an organisation is quite important. I think deepening resilience is equally as important as it is indeed, exposing blind spots and maximising return. And certainly from a strategy viewpoint, it's also a great way as well of, we would argue, of actually ensuring that your marketing strategy is actually in line with where you want it to be. Because in fact, if your firm's name is being promoted on open source platforms, then that could well be an indication that your actually strategy is heading in the right direction. Equally speaking, it could also indicate that perhaps your strategy isn't working if it means that you're going to potentially get exposed and lose things of value in the process. Next slide, please. So this is an interesting one about insider threats, and this is quite a moated area. I think quite often that that when we've been talking about looking at the external-facing world, these are all. I know that percentages are always quite a debatable point, but I think that what's quite interesting about these facts here that are presented by the Chartered Institute of Auditors and others, that 43% of data breaches are caused by insiders. Now, that's roughly split 50-50 between data breaches caused by insiders that are malicious and the rest caused by insiders that are due to human error. I think as well that it also shows you as well that 57% of data breaches, despite the investments that many firms have made in very robust, or what they perceive to be very robust, security investments and policies, 57% of data breaches are still caused by external forces. And again, if you understand who the external parties are that may be targeting your organisation in advance, then we would argue that it gives you a much better chance of being more resilient and ensuring that they're not successful in obtaining things of value. Next slide, please. And who is the average insider? Well, what's quite interesting about this is that the average insider is someone who is typically a loyal employee for 5 years before they become an insider. What's worryingly is that insiders are typically detected 33 months after committing fraud. So just think about that for a second. That's not from day one. That's 33 months after they've been committing fraud. 51% of insiders are managers or above. 88% of insiders are permanent staff rather than contractors. 7% join a company to deliberately cause fraud. 89% of insiders have no previous criminal convictions, which again is an interesting statistic in itself. And many insiders emerge from disaffected employees, often caused by a toxic manager. Given the fact at the moment that we're also going through, this really changing time with COVID-19, and I think it's important to stress that people do change. They change, in our experience, caused by events that sometimes are outside of their control, and also change as a result of, potentially being compromised because they have put themselves in a difficult place, maybe through social habits or by their lifestyle away from work. The fact that you've got 7% of people joining a company to deliberately cause harm or cause fraud. Again, if I hadn't have had personal experience of this at my previous employer, I would have kind of been very skeptical about that. But what's quite interesting about that is that means that 93% of the people that join a company turn up from day one with an intent to just do their job and be good company citizens. Again, when you consider the fact that all the clients that we deal with have very, fairly rigorous HR and recruiting processes and policies, it does make you wonder as to, how it is that at a time when we're talking continually about recognizing the individual and looking at mental health issues, for example, particularly throughout the pandemic, there's been a great awareness about it. How is it that people are becoming disaffected caused by toxic managers or by companies being perhaps very robust with their employees when they are now working in a hybrid working environment that's been brought about by the changes caused by COVID-19? And we're going to come to an example on that in a short while, where we'll talk a bit more about hostile profiling where that hasn't been applied in an appropriate manner. Next slide, please. The truth is inconvenient. Morrison's a brand name that I suspect that most of you know, certainly the UK is a leading UK supermarket chain. Andrew Skelton is the gentleman in the picture below you. Andrew Skelton is perhaps infamous, or maybe infamous, for the fact that back in 2013 he was disciplined by Morrison's for conducting an online business using Morrison's IT infrastructure and assets to run that business. He was subsequently, he was a senior IT auditor, and been at the firm for quite some time, very trusted and respected, but he ran a separate business on the sideline. And the only reason that he got caught by Morrison's was the fact that he was using the post room, the Morrison's post room at head office in Bradford, to send out his products to his customers, and one of the parcels burst in the post room, and they found a quantity of pills that they thought initially were illegal pills. He was actually selling legal highs. The gentleman Andrew Skelton got disciplined, but he became very angry about that, and in a malicious act, posted over 100,000 current and previous employee details on open chat rooms on the web, which subsequently, to Morrison's credit, when they found that out, they had him arrested. He was dismissed, and he went to prison for 8 years, and he's due out probably round about now, I think. The reason that I mention this is that this case has only really concluded as recent as April 2020, because as a consequence of this act by Andrew Morrison, which Morrison's were completely unaware that he was running a business using their assets to run this business whilst he was in their employment. Morrison's were awarded £180,000 when he went to prison in damages. There was a class action lawsuit formed by over 9,000 current and former employees, I believe, is the total amount in question, that only recently was finally dismissed by the Supreme Court after a number of court challenges by the class action group, because Morrison's were ruled to be not vicariously liable for their employees' bad behaviour. I think that, when you look at it, 7 years down the line, it could be argued that would Morrison's prefer to maybe conduct perhaps hostile profiling on their business as a matter of course to identify where maybe they could have identified wrongdoing in their organisation way beforehand. It's a contentious point, and we're not looking to debate the ruling by the Supreme Court, which seemed to be quite final on this matter, of course. But again, I think it's something that highlights the dangers of not understanding or not knowing what your risks are. Next slide, please. This is a Tesla, and this is another interesting case that's still going on at the moment. So I'm kind of not really at liberty to kind of comment it in any real detail, other than the fact that in July 2019, this case was brought by Tesla that said that in fact that a former long-standing trusted and respected colleague who'd been working on their autopilot source code had allegedly stolen over 120,000 files, or over 300,000 files, I beg your pardon, had been taken in his time working on this project, which took Tesla over 5 years and hundreds of millions of dollars to develop this autopilot source code and application. And this individual concerned actually went to work for it's Tesla's contention that this individual went to work for XPeng Motors, who are a Chinese competitor to them, they're probably quite a big rival to their marketplace. And you can see here the end result with this product that's allegedly that XPeng Motors actually developed as a result of getting access to the source code presented at the Shanghai Motor Show in 2019. What's quite interesting about this is still a matter of ongoing legal action and investigation, but Tesla are quite clear that this individual and four others were very actively engaged in nefarious acts in securing company information and IP, which they then traded in return for work at XPeng Motors, and that's quite an interesting case, I think, to bear in mind. Next slide, please. Again, H&M, another well-known brand. This is probably a case we would argue of how not to do it. H&M have just been fined on the second largest ever fine under GDPR in the EU so far, which I think is $35 million. The largest fine is actually Google with $50 million, 50 million euros, I beg your pardon. H&M actually conducted what you could call, quite rightly, illegal surveillance of several hundred employees over a period of time by their managers, where managers basically inquired about their pattern of life situation on an individual basis, asking how you're getting on, finding out about family illnesses, maybe social problems and plans and ambitions and all that kind of good stuff. And it was then documented in a file that was then shared amongst managers and used for purposes of then determining about who should leave the organisation or who should stay. And again, that's very highly Orwellian, and I'm delighted to see that that this was brought to light, and H&M have been brought to book and punished accordingly and taken into account for what, frankly speaking, is not good practice by any stretch of the imagination. And again, it's not what hostile profiling is supposed to be about. But it is a great example, I feel, of how not to conduct hostile profiling at any point in time at all. Next question. Next slide, please. Right. Okay. So we've looked at hostile profiling. We've looked at why we do hostile profiling. We've covered why you need to do it now. We've looked at the legalities of hostile profiling, and we've looked at the benefits that you get from hostile profiling. I promised that I would, if we go to the next slide, please. Thank you again for listening today. I promised you at the outset that I would help you, I would aim to help you understand what hostile profiling was about and what the benefits are involved in hostile profiling. I trust I've helped to clarify that for you, and that in a bit of better detail, and where to get help if you want it, or indeed if you need it. Thank you for listening today, and appreciate your time.
That's great. Thanks very much, Michael. You can hear me okay there. Particularly enjoyed the slide. What is it? Trust is good, but control is better, or trust but check. There's certainly some lessons for us there in our professional and personal lives, perhaps. We've got a lot of questions coming in, which is great. So, but let me start with one of my own, actually. Given the photographs of the chap in the cafe, which I think we can all associate with one way or another, how much more do you think are people being targeted in their home working environment? Do you think, perhaps as a result of COVID and the fact that everyone pretty much is working from home now?
Well, that's a very good question, and you're right. It does pose that. It does pose that picture does pose that issue. For all we know, that gentleman, he's working from a cafe because he's maybe not got access to facilities at home. But I think that in terms of your question, I think that it's without a doubt people are being more and more targeted away from the, if you like, from the safety of the home office environment. Because organised criminals now know that there's probably a 75% likelihood that you're going to be working from home rather than working from an office in the current period of time. Whatever the services and solutions that we're using for our respective employers, it's fair to say that these systems and security procedures that you've got in place in your home environment are nowhere near as robust as they would be, for example, in an office in a city. So I think, and it's probably easier to target someone in their home environment. Just in a way that organised criminals kind of target a house that's empty, that looks right to be burgled. And I think, again, it's exactly the same principle. I think that going forward on that point again, James, whilst I think it's important that companies are taking the steps to kind of, look after the well-being of their employees when they're working from home, I think, and you don't want to set people, in a nervous state of mind about, saying that you're being targeted. But I think that firms probably do need to do a bit more to help their employees understand the importance of taking measures and being more aware of their surroundings. This gentleman, I mean, he was doing nothing wrong. He was out in a coffee shop doing work. It was an opportunity, and I seized it. It could have been so horribly wrong if I'd have been a criminal actor.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. Listen, thank you. We've got a really good questions coming in. Here's one from Alexa. It says, it seems to me that the encouraged use of style profiling, especially within one's company, would create a paradox where trust begins to be eroded from within organisations. Is this surely not a negative, and what are our options to stop this, or is it simply inevitable?
That is a very good question. You're right, it can be seen as a paradox. I think what's quite interesting is, getting back to the slide that we showed earlier on, not everybody joins a company from day one with a view to committing fraud. But people do change and people do commit fraud. So there's a very, very fine balance in power. If you look at the H&M case, where managers clearly abuse their position of trust with their team members by, asking personal details about their life in a way that, that people do talk about, things in the workplace, and then using that to document that for unpleasant purposes, and they've been rightly punished for it. I think that having said that, though, surely, though, if you look at Morrison's as an example, and again, I accept that it's a contentious point, Morrison's surely now, if would prefer to have known that a senior IT employee was conducting a business that placed their organisation at risk 7 years down the line. So I think that, there is a fine line around it. I think that, we do need to be more proactive about it. But I think that fundamentally, the steps that we do for most of our clients is actually looking at how criminal organisations are targeting a company externally. That doesn't necessarily always lead to an insider threat situation, but sometimes you may find that a criminal organisation has a member inside a company. And that, again, is in itself is a source of concern, because, as we said, 89% of people that commit insider threats or commit fraud inside a company did not have a criminal record from day one.
Points. A couple of questions coming in from Bob. Nice to hear from you again, Bob. First one is, would you advocate spoofing or fictionalizing your data as a means of protection?
Can you explain whose data are we referring to, Bob?
He'll come back with that one. Let me move on to another one from Bob. I'm sure he'll see something interesting. Do you think that the average insiders have any kind of health or mental health issues? Isn't it interesting one, given the current environment, actually? So COVID-19 will undoubtedly exacerbate mental health problems in enterprises.
That is a good question. And I think that it sounds a bit of a cliche, but people change. And people change caused by circumstances that could be health-related as much as anything else. There could be social issues. So, yes, it is quite true that an insider could be someone who's perfectly, for want of a better word, a decent, upstanding, upright citizen or individual within an organisation can change caused by circumstances, and that may well be that they could well be perhaps get mental health issues caused by maybe bullying behaviour by a colleague or a manager, or indeed by circumstances that affect them outside of work, where maybe ill health of themselves or family or loved one could well impact their ability. So. Getting back, so answering that question, that's why I'm saying that it's not quite as black and white sometimes, as I think one of the previous Alexa asked earlier on about the paradox. I think that, you need to have all of the facts at your hand and make informed decisions around that.
Bob's just come back, actually. He said basically when he's talking about the spoofing or fictionalisation of data, he's talking about his own data, for example. Wasn't there an incident on some social media recently where someone tried to catch someone out by narrowing down who they sent it to?
Well, I mean, it depends in which context you're suggesting, Bob, that you spoof your data. I mean, if you're looking to spoof your data with a view to getting a job in a company, then I wouldn't encourage that in any way, shape or form at all. So the answer is no.
Right. Hang on, let's just jump to another one here. Bear with me a second. Okay, this is a long question. So this is from John. It says, one would assume that with rising political polarisation and the uncertainty around Brexit, crikey, forgot about that, COVID and many other modern day issues, that tensions are at an all-time high. Have you witnessed any trends emerging or an acceleration in hostile profiling of late?
So I understand as well there's a lot more tension in society at the moment, obviously with politics, let alone with the current pandemic and all the uncertainty around people's employment status as well. And that's having massive impact, I think, and that comes back again to the question earlier on about mental health issues, about where people perhaps are maybe getting polarised or very uncertain about events. In terms of the last part of the question, can you just repeat the last sentence of that question for me, James? I just want to hear that again before I reply.
So let me read it back to you again without my interjection. So one would assume that with rising political polarisation and the uncertainty around Brexit, COVID and the many other modern day issues, tensions are at an all-time high. So one would assume that they're at an all-time high. Have you witnessed any trends emerging or an acceleration in hostile profiling of late?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you touched on
because
that
of this.
as well.
Yeah. I think because people, I think again, I think in the same way that maybe as employees are uncertain about their kind of work and social moral compass in these times of change and challenge, I think it's sometimes easy to forget that leaders of companies and directors of companies go through the same kind of anxieties and doubts as well. We're all humans at the end of the day, and I think that what the current situation has shown us, along with Brexit and COVID and all of that, in terms of that no one is immune to the impact of these challenges to what, and I hate to use this phrase, about what was deemed to be normal beforehand. And I think that's something that I think, again, getting back to Alexa's question earlier on, that there are many paradoxes around this, and it's not always a black and white and open and shut case. But having access to the information, as we said earlier on, and knowing in advance what you need to know means that you can take informed decisions about what you need to take decisions about and improve your resilience by making informed decisions ahead of the curve rather than reacting to events. And in our experience, and this is something I should have said earlier on, it's not always a given that we're called in to help clients before the event. It's a lot easier to fix things before they happen. It's very difficult to fix things after they're done.
This is from Simone. Simone asks, is this type of service legal?
Yes, it is legal because we're not committing any crimes. We're using open source intelligence gathering. I think hopefully as I illustrated earlier on today, we're just accessing and analysing data that is publicly available through open legal sources and then coming to the table with a conclusive conclusion, if you like, about what that data may well mean for the individual or the companies concerned.
Yeah, and perhaps in terms of the process, I've got a question here from Ian. And Ian asks, why might a criminal organisation target my employees for access to our data and IP?
It may well be that's a good question, Bob. I think that it may well be that the criminals feel that targeting the individuals to compromise them, to carry out their acts, is a far safer way of getting into an organisation and an easier way to get into an organisation than maybe then trying to hack through an organisation's, shall we say, very robust cybersecurity defences. And also the chance of them getting caught, I would hasten to add, is remote. If the employee gets caught, well, that's just a casualty of war. So I think that, frankly speaking, criminals don't operate in a way, as I'm sure you know, Bob, from your own experience, that criminals don't act in a way that is very, that companies operate in.
Perhaps related, there's a question from is it Shanika? Most hostile profiles focus on companies or individuals?
Is the question, do most hostile profiles focus on companies or individuals? Is that in terms of the service that we carry out or in terms of in general?
Probably in general. There's no more to the question than that, I'm afraid.
Okay. Most of the engagements that we work on are company-led hostile profile investigations. So a company would engage us to typically understand what their risk posture is and how they look externally to a criminal organisation or indeed a state actor would look at it. And in case I didn't explain that, a state actor is a government organisation or government financed organisation that's engaged in espionage.
Thank you. I think we may have one more question, or time for one more question. That is, hang on, I think I've read that one out already, so bear with me. Just think. I've got one more from Bob, actually, who's a very active participant today. Just bear with me.
Yes, indeed.
This is an interesting one. If there are data matters over which you have no concern, so perhaps support for extreme regimes, strange practices, etc., does it matter?
Can you repeat that question again? I didn't quite.
Yeah, so if there are data matters over which you have no concern, so whether it's support for extreme regimes or strange practices, does it matter? I guess, is there a concern that maybe maybe it's a Big Brother type question?
So are we saying that if I've got an interest on, there's data around extreme organisations? The question's still not clear to me. I mean, is this in relation to a company, or are we talking about individuals? I think.
Bob, if you're still there, if you could give me a little bit more on that, to be fair.
It's not quite clear. I mean,
I guess we've got one more from Peter. Peter's asking, what are the type of issues found when conducting a hostile profile?
They're quite varied. We found out, as I said before, we found out that people are not who they say they are, so they're basically being employed under a false identity. That in itself, again, is an issue. We found people that are in fact in regulated firms. For example, people that have been declared bankrupt, and that was not a known fact. We found people that with unfortunately with social habits. That means that that are quite that are legal. That means that they are potentially a risk of compromise. We found people that are actually conducting full-blown fraud inside an organisation. They vary quite extensively when you actually look inside a firm, and you find that maybe the trail leads to maybe from externally from the firm leads to a trail inside the firm, almost like a trail of breadcrumbs sometimes. And for one thing, we're not employed to be judge and jury about what we find. I mean, it's for a company to make a decision about what they do with the information that's presented to them. But certainly, if you find that, and again, getting back to my own experience in the beginning of this, to actually find that someone is actually not who they say they are and employed by a competitor to actually steal information from the employer that you're working for, that in itself is quite is a big issue. It's illegal and it's fraud. But I think that for a company to then take appropriate actions and measures, which in this case, the case that I recounted at the beginning of the presentation, my then employers did, was the right action, a course of action to take.
Okay, I think we're running out of time, but I'll just squeeze hopefully one more quick one in, which is sort of related. This is from Scott. Thank you, Scott. Attempts at hacking seem to be increasing. How effective are these techniques? Are they succeeding?
The techniques are always evolving, and the techniques are always evolving, and they are successful within reason. I think that what we've learned is that the criminal organisations are extremely well funded by and large. They've got access to great skills, and I think that as time goes on, as we're seeing through the current pandemic, when there's been quite a big increase in particular types of hacking or attacks on organisations, using the individuals, or so people clicking on links, for example, that they've been sent by people that they trust, that actually allows organisations, criminal organisations, access into their company, is probably the quickest way of getting into an organisation. So things like malware and ransomware, I think, are becoming quite at the moment are seeing massive increases. And getting back to your point earlier on, James, I know we're just running up on top on time. That reflects also as well the fact that the criminals are targeting the individuals because they know that the individuals are generally by and large isolated and working from home. They're not sitting alongside their peers. And it's actually quite difficult to say, look, I've got this. What do you think? Look over my shoulder. Does this look legit to you? Should I click on it or not? People are making decisions based upon the fact that they're being targeted in isolation. And that is an important consequence of where we are right now around the hybrid way or working from home situation caused by COVID.
Thanks, Michael. I think that's a great place to finish, actually. Funnily enough, there were 2 or 3 questions just coming in right at the end there, but we really are out of time. So I would encourage those questioners. They've got Michael's details on the slide that will be posted soon. I'm sure, Michael, you'd be happy to take those directly.
Always have questions on this, James. Thank you.
So, again, thank you so much, Michael, for that incredibly insightful presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. And on screen, you can see the next ones we've got coming up. There's some examples, rather. The next one's coming up next week. We do hope that you or colleagues will be able to join us for those. So, finally, to wrap up, thank you again, Michael. Thank you for Morgan for arranging all the logistics. Thank you for everyone for joining us. Please do feel free to join us for future webinars and go back over the ones we've done as well.
Thanks for having me, James. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.